Does eating whole grains like oats cause us to get fat? I've heard this question a number of times in the comments and in other places on social media. Sometimes this is connected to the carbohydrate content. Does eating a food with a lot of carbohydrate cause me to gain weight? Other times it's about the glucose spikes or the insulin spikes after eating. People also ask, okay, a food that causes glucose to go up postprandially after eating, does that cause weight gain? So these are all reasonable questions. They're all good questions. And in science, this is exactly what we do. We ask questions and then we test. So scientists have studied this question many times. Many randomized trials have been conducted. For example, there's a meta-analysis that combines 7 randomized trials and reports that oats had no significant effect on body weight or body fat, and they actually reduced waist circumference. By the way, this meta-analysis also looked at a number of other whole grains like wheat, barley, rye, and rice. And when all the trials were put together, none of them led to a significant increase in body weight. And whole grain rice, so black rice or brown rice, actually led to a decrease in body weight and body fat. Another meta-analysis looked at about 50 randomized trials put together. And essentially they found that depending what the comparator was, what the oats were compared to, they either saw no significant effect of oats on body weight, BMI, waist circumference, or a reduction of these metrics on oats. So, for example, trials where one group gets given some oats and the control group gets no oats, they generally see a significant reduction in metrics like body weight, BMI, waist circumference in the group that gets the oats. Whereas comparing oats to other specific foods like wheat, eggs, rice, etc., generally there's no significant difference in these metrics between the two groups. And this really gets at what is probably the number one question in nutrition, which is instead of what? What are we comparing the food to? Because that can really determine the outcome of a trial. And one problem with randomized trials looking at whole grains in general is they often compare the whole grains to a refined grain. So we want to take a look at randomized trials that use specific alternatives and that use some whole foods. Eggs, for example, are a really interesting comparison because they're both whole foods, oats and eggs are, and they're both common breakfast choices. So it's an interesting thing to look at. And there's a few trials that compare oats to eggs. So for example, one trial out there used whole oats, another trial used instant oats. In both, they're comparing the oats to 2 eggs eaten daily, and they both find no significant difference in waist circumference or BMI between the two foods after 4 to 6 weeks. There's another randomized trial that used red meat as the control, although they weren't specifically looking at oats, they used whole grains in general. So foods like whole grain bread or muesli, and matched for calories across both groups. So either the whole grains or the red meat, unprocessed red meat, eaten daily. And after 3 weeks of the intervention, the folks on the red meat saw no significant change to their BMI, body weight, or body fat, whereas the folks on whole grains saw a significant reduction of their body fat. Their BMI and body weight trended down. It's what we call borderline statistically significant. The p-value was 0.05, which is right on the cusp. So let's be conservative and say that on the whole grains, there was no significant reduction of BMI and body weight, only of body fat. Another limitation of randomized trials, especially these trials looking at single food swaps, is they're often shortish. So they might go for a few weeks or a couple months. But there is one trial that a team conducted that is much longer. And they specifically looked at a population with celiac disease. These folks will remove all the wheat, barley, and rye from their diet because it has gluten, but they'll often cut out all the grains. And so it's an interesting population where you have no oats at baseline, and you can try to add back the oats to only half of them and see what happens. So they did that. They randomized them. They gave oats to half of them, not the other half. They published their results after 6 months to a year, and they saw no significant difference to the BMI between the two groups. And then at 5 years of follow-up, they published again, still no significant difference in BMI between the two groups. Another trial tried to push not the length, but the amount of oats. They asked, okay, what if we give a larger amount than most trials do? Maybe then we'll see stronger effects. So they had their participants eat oats twice a day, amounting to about 300 calories a day of oats. So a little over 10% of their calories were coming from oats. And the oats were supposed to replace one of their staple foods. And this trial was not just randomized, it was double-blinded. And the control group was pretty interesting. They used what they call a placebo. And they described this placebo as having a similar external appearance, I guess, but without beta-glucan. So beta-glucan are a type of fiber that's present in oats. They don't say anything else about this placebo, so I'm guessing it's a refined form of oats without the beta-glucan, without some of the fiber. This intervention lasted for 3 months, and at the end, the placebo group had no significant change to their body weight, BMI, or body fat, whereas all 3 metrics were reduced in the group receiving the whole oats. They dropped about 2 kilos in those 3 months. So this trial is pretty interesting. It suggests that the benefit of oats may be coming specifically from this type of fiber, the beta-glucan. The authors write that their findings demonstrated the anti-obesity benefit of oats for the human body. Oats reduced weight and body fat, especially inhibiting abdominal fat distribution. So to summarize everything, out of all the trials I've seen so far on oats, looking at body weight, body fat, waist circumference, the majority show no significant effect. A couple suggest a reduction on oats, and I haven't seen a single trial so far that shows an increase in these metrics. Maybe there is an outlier out there. So far, I haven't found it. You guys often ask about the sources of funding for the studies that we go over. So I took a look, and I found basically 3 types of studies. One type was funded by oats-related industries or companies, and some were not directly funded by them, but the oats that were used in the study were provided by a company. So I would still consider that affiliated with an oats industry. Then there were studies that were independently funded, nothing to do with oats industries. And then there was a third category that's very interesting, where the funding appears to go against the oats. So for example, those trials where the oats are compared to eggs, often they're funded by the Egg Board. Regardless of source of funding, the majority of studies that I've seen show no significant effect of oats for body weight, body fat, waist circumference, etc. So putting together everything we talked about, gaining weight or putting on body fat by eating some oats, by including some oats in a diet, especially if it's whole oats, doesn't seem to be a concern for most people. I wouldn't rule out that someone out there can gain weight by eating oats. I think it's possible. For example, if someone finds oats very unsatiating, has a large bowl, and is ravenous 5 minutes later and has to eat an entire other meal, yeah, I think it's possible. It just seems uncommon, and so it's generally not represented in these studies. Another interesting takeaway is that foods that cause a glucose spike, a glucose excursion, essentially a wave of glucose rising and then dropping after a meal, as we see with foods that contain carbohydrate, like oatmeal, for example, does not necessarily lead to weight gain. In some cases, it may be true, in others not. And some foods that don't cause glucose spikes can cause weight gain, and others not. We put on weight, we put on fat if we overeat consistently, with or without glucose spikes. For a lot more information on oats, check out my full conversation with Dr. Berry right here. And here's a video on how to lose weight in a healthy way. Check those out. I'll meet you in there. Take care.